In the TV footage, we can see Armstrong standing at the foot of the ladder as Aldrin descends, supposedly taking the still photos, which are the official record of this event. Aldrin is in darkness. Aldrin is not lit. Yet the published still photo sequence clearly indicates the use of an artificial light source. Did Armstrong really take these still photos during Aldrin's descent on the moon? In our opinion, probably not. We propose that this is a completely restaged, or rather pre-staged, set of studio photographs.
So, wherever the Aldrin descending the ladder sequence of stills was taken, an artificial source of light was deployed.
I know that they had no extra lightning, no flashes or things like that. So it has to be the reflection from the surface.
That the astronaut will be adequately lit whilst in the shadow side of the LEM solely from natural light or earthshine bouncing off the lunar surface is an argument advanced by others as well as Jan Lundberg, but it's untenable. To make a direct comparison, the surface of the moon on average has the ability to reflect light from any source whatsoever at whatever distance from its surface to the same degree as asphalt does on Earth, on average approximately 7%. In other words, whatever the strength of the light arriving on the lunar surface, whether by natural or other means, the ability of the average lunar surface to reflect light remains constant. Indeed, the lunar surface luminosity is so low it doesn't even manage to illuminate the shadow side of the smallest rocks, as we've already seen. Here's another good example. The sun, or prime light source, is behind the LEM. This picture is taken into the light, so the side of the craft nearest to us should be absolutely black, but has been filled in with a generous amount of light. Particularly obvious is this piece of equipment illuminated from the front.
That sequence of images on the lunar surface, taken mainly by Armstrong, of course, with that one camera, which was incidentally left on the moon, so it's going to be a marvellous relic for when we eventually get back there, of course. The film came back. That film, probably, I would say, has never ever been bettered, whether on the moon or subsequently. Almost every one of those relatively small number of images taken by Armstrong appeared to be splendidly composed. You remember the classic face-on picture of Aldrin with his visor reflecting the entire landing scene, the lunar module, the flag, the TV camera, and Armstrong taking the picture reflected in the visor. It's a marvellous picture.
With that comment, H.J.P. Arnold has led us to another of the classic Apollo 11 images. In fact, one could say that this particular shot conveys the very essence of the entire Apollo program. Yet this classic picture of Aldrin has several very serious problems.
Aldrin cannot be standing in natural sunlight in this image because the surface around him is not evenly lit, as would be the case with light from the sun. This scene is obviously lit with uneven artificial lighting. The prime source of light is over Aldrin's left shoulder. The light is emanating from this direction. We know this is so because we can see what photographers call fall-off in the top left, the top right, and the left foreground. This fall-off effect is the name given to darker areas caused by lighting a subject with a non-uniform source of light, lighting that does not have enough spread, as this false colour version particularly reveals. Secondly, we can see that our old friend the fill-in light has again been used to illuminate the suit detail on Aldrin's right-hand side, the left of the picture.
On the face of it, there doesn't seem to be anything particularly strange about this image to me. The sun is over behind the guy's left shoulder. He's casting an image, a shadow moving to bottom left, as you would expect. The astronaut himself, you can see, because of although he's not in direct sunlight, the direct sunlight is on his back. He's being illuminated by reflected light from the foreground.
Remember, our claim is that the fill light is artificial. The camera position itself is also in doubt, for we seem to be looking down on the astronaut. How can we tell if that's so? Well, recalling the large centre reticle cannot be anywhere but in the centre of the image, we're surprised to find that this reticle is over the lower part of Aldrin's right leg. The Hasselblad camera was attached to the astronaut's chest at the time, and so the centre of the image should be over the abdominal area of the subject. This lower leg position for the centre reticle strongly indicates that the camera was in fact positioned at a higher level. As this graphic demonstrates, the centre of the picture can only be over the subject's lower leg if the camera is positioned at eye level and then tilted down. The camera height and tilt angle was calculated by David Groves. This fact represents another serious problem. The reflection of this scene mirrored in the astronaut's visor shows the astrophotographer with his camera clearly positioned at chest level, which actually cannot be. So this false reflection must have been composited or painted in over the original image. The reflection we see in the visor cannot be that of the photographer of the image.
The horizon is a very good datum. On the moon, the horizon effectively acts as a spirit level. We know it's about 89 degrees from the true vertical. Therefore, the position of the horizon cutting through the image of the astronaut shows us the level of the camera when the picture was taken. And if we look at the picture, we can see the horizon cuts very nicely at face level.
And as for the orientation of where the astronaut was, I mean, the moon's surface isn't completely flat. He may well be standing there with a chest with his camera at chest level, and the guy being photographed may be a couple of feet lower down because the ground slopes.
The camera taking the photograph could have been positioned on the chest of an astronaut, and that astronaut could have been about 2 foot higher than the astronaut that was being photographed. To this end, we could analyse the shadow in the image. Basically, the information we have and can make use of is we know the width of the visor in the image, the focal length of the lens used on the camera. Using that information, we can analyse the shadow of the astronaut's left leg and determine between the two astronauts the variation in height of the surface. The variation in height of the surface between the astronauts is typically a few inches. It would have to actually be 2 feet to explain the incorrect positioning of the camera when the image was taken.
I'll be honest with you, I think that's pseudo-scientific, nitpicky claptrap. And again, I don't know why we should spend even a moment trying to judge that.
But as we've seen, there are indeed crucial problems with the photographs. This is the point. The so-described nitpicky, pseudo-scientific claptrap is not pseudo at all. The analysis has been undertaken based on the laws of physics. Fortunately, the information encrypted within these images has survived the voyage across 3 decades and is now being decoded by people like Percy and Groves. The proof is in the detail. It may be uncomfortable for NASA to accept that the warning whistles of these unknown photographic encoders are at long last now being heard.
By the way, the Apollo 11 high camera examples are not isolated ones. Here's a picture of Albine of Apollo 12, also taken from too high a camera position. The camera is looking down on the subject, belying the reflection in the visor. Notice the horizon passing right through the centre of the visor. There are further examples from Apollo 11 where the camera position is even higher than that in the classic shot. Here we see Aldrin standing by the LEM with the horizon not cutting through his visor at all, but passing above the height of his helmet, indicating that the camera position was even higher than that of the picture of Albine and the classic photograph itself. Some people have said perhaps they retouched the pictures to bring up the detail of the astronauts, but any retouching of images cannot apply to Apollo 11 pictures. We've examined a duplicate or copy of the roll of film from magazine 40 that purports to come from Armstrong's camera. It's a roll with well over 100 coloured images. Retouched or publicity pictures cannot get into a continuous roll of film. So none of these images can have been retouched unless they've been collectively rephotographed onto a continuous roll under entirely different technical conditions than we've been led to believe.
So what does Hasselblad have to say about this classic Aldrin picture? Does it look to Jan Lundberg as though the subject was lit?
Yes, it seems like he's standing in the spotlight. And I can't explain that. That escapes me. Why? So maybe you have to find Armstrong and ask him.
The most compelling piece of evidence in this photograph is not the measurements of the height of the camera, but the reticles, the little crosses that are superimposed on the image at the time the photograph is taken. The largest reticle appears at the center. That central position is fixed in the camera. It cannot move. You have to have, with an image, it hasn't been interfered with in any way, that reticule appearing in the center of the image. If we look at this famous photograph, we can see the central reticule towards the bottom of the astronaut's right leg. This is significantly offset from the center of the image. This cannot occur in that position unless the photograph has been copied and reframed.
I don't think this cross here necessarily does indicate the centre of the photograph. There's another cross over here, there's another cross over there, and in fact NASA photographs you often see have fiducial crosses all over the place to help them orientate themselves.
Why is the centre reticle not in the centre of the image?
The exact answer to the question is I don't really know and haven't even bothered to go find out. And the reason is this is 30-year-old stuff. We mounted this expedition, the expeditions to the moon, almost 30 years ago. And frankly, I had a chance to look over the points that this person was making. I didn't understand them. I don't understand why we should spend the time to go off and do the research to look up, to prove to people that we went to the moon. The fact of the matter is we did go to the moon.
While noting that Brian Welch referred to one single expedition to the moon and then corrected himself, it's interesting that NASA, via its media representative, declares itself not accountable to the public for its actions. This despite the fact that NASA went to the moon for all mankind. And surely the fact that one individual spokesman claims he doesn't understand the questions asked does not in any way invalidate the demand for a proper response and the necessity for a proper response.
The effort involved in trying to fake, one image might not be too bad, but in trying to fake thousands and thousands to assure that you were never discovered over 25 years seems completely implausible to me. It seems a bizarre thing to question something that is so demonstrably part of history just by trying to interpret 2 or 3 photographs when the project was so much deeper than that and affected so many people in so many ways.
This establishment view, albeit not held by everyone, misses the point entirely and is not a reason for ignoring these disturbing findings. The quantity of suspect pictures is not the real issue, it's what these images convey. These pictures have been presented to the entire world as authentic and actual photographs of this most significant event, mankind's first steps onto a planet other than his home. To ignore or dismiss the questions raised by the discovery of even one technically defective photograph purporting to be a part of this official record is to sidestep the issue. However, we'd like to offer the upholders of this status quo viewpoint yet another major challenge. In Western Australia, during the live telecast of Apollo 11 in 1969, many viewers in that region of Australia, including Una Ronald, were to have an extraordinary experience.
When this moon landing was in the offing, I for one decided to stay up to watch the live telecast, and I did, and we saw a lot of activity on the television screen from the control centre, a lot of anticipation, a lot of excitement.
But before we get to what happens next, we need to know how the TV coverage of Apollo 11 was supposed to have reached our screens.
Just shortly before Armstrong stepped on the moon, you can actually see the switch take place where it goes from this stark black and white to a little better. And they stayed with the television signal from Honeysuckle Creek. So when Armstrong stepped on the surface of the moon, it actually came through Australia, but at the time it was reported as being through Goldstone. The voice came through Goldstone, but the TV pictures came from Australia.
It appears that correct information was apparently withheld at the time as to what was supposed to be happening with Apollo 11's reception.
But as I watched this person walking, a Coke bottle in the lower right quadrant of the screen, it seemed to be kicked over and rolled across. And for me that was just astounding, and I exclaimed aloud at the time, "It's a fake, it's a setup, they're not on the moon at all, look at this, it's a Coke bottle." And they were going to broadcast the same film again in the morning, and I phoned several of my friends, did you watch, and they hadn't. But they were going to watch in the morning. And I waited, of course, to say, well, did you see it? But it didn't happen. I watched the second telecast. There was no Coke bottle, which led me to believe at the time that it must have been edited out. I was convinced it was fake, but why? Why it should be faked? Why such a setup? 2 or 3 others of my acquaintance did see it. And furthermore, there were letters written to the West Australian newspaper. They mentioned the Coke bottle. And I waited for it to brew up. I thought, my goodness, there's going to be a glorious ding-dong here going on about this Coke bottle. But suddenly there was nothing at all. And I presume that those who saw it denied their own senses, as people will do. Began to think, well, they couldn't have seen it, or perhaps it was there and that was okay. They'd thrown some rubbish out of the spacecraft or something like that. It could have been. People will invent all kinds of solutions to what is not explained.
What Una Ronald and her friends did not know was that Western Australia was a special case concerning the reception of the initial Apollo images. Contrary to the procedure for that continent set up by Honeysuckle Creek and Parkes, together with NASA and Australian TV, the Apollo 11 images were neither sent directly to Western Australia via satellite, nor was there a broadband link from Sydney in 1969. These images had to be sent over to Perth from Sydney by other means and then retransmitted locally. So for an engineer in the loop, aware of the hoaxed live TV coverage, there was motive for adding further additions to the scene. Moreover, here was an opportunity for someone in the know to manipulate the material before transmission across Western Australia. Bill Kaysing is a science writer and was head of technical publications in the Propulsion Field Labs in California from 1956 to 1963. He was employed by Rocketdyne, contractors to NASA who built the Saturn V rocket and the command and service module.
I was very much in on testing and edited and wrote technical reports on testing and, of course, witness tests.
So what is Bill Kaysing's view of what actually happened during Apollo?
As I see it, NASA and other connected agencies knew that they couldn't get to the moon and back. All right, they had to simulate it. So to do this, they went to, say, agencies like ARPA, Advanced Research Projects Agency in Massachusetts. They're connected with the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. I have worked for ARPA, and I know that they have the highest level scientists. So NASA and NSA and other assorted agencies went to MIT and said, okay, this is a super secret project.